Virtual classroom, Professor Coomer here. Let's talk a little bit about outlining. And I've said it once, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Outlining is a complete waste of time if you let it be a waste of time. For the rest of us who understand outlining, we know that outlining is indispensable. It's something that's really important. For us to completely understand outlining, we have to understand the goals of an essay, or at least the parts of an essay. So here are the parts of an essay, and I'm going to give you a really abbreviated and a very bare bones way to do outlining that's much faster than maybe you're used to, and it's much more effective than just about any other form I've seen out there. So first of all, we have to understand that this right here, and I'm not just drawing shapes in order to draw shapes, but this is a visual representation of what an essay is supposed to be like. So I draw this up here. This is the introduction. Now, as far as an introduction goes, we generally don't outline introductions. You can outline them, but typically the purpose of an introduction is to introduce the idea or the topic that you're going to be writing about in the essay. And so oftentimes it's best to leave that after you've gotten the rest of this completed so that you're really sure, okay, this is what I'm going to introduce. A lot of people will get hung up on their introductions and they won't ever get to the actual essay. So I always recommend leaving the introduction till later, but just remember the whole point of an introduction is to, and I do an upside down triangle because an upside down triangle is broad at the top, okay? And when we think about broad, like broad concepts, like for instance, the concept of learning lessons, okay? That concept is something it would be something you might talk about in the beginning of your introduction. For instance, there are many times in life when we learn lessons and we didn't even think we were going to learn them. Or it's funny how we learn some of life's biggest lessons in some of life's smallest memories, or things like that. You're basically coming up with really broad topics, really broad ideas, and you're working your way into getting to the point. And you can think about this the same way you might think about having a conversation. When you first meet someone, you don't start telling them your deepest, darkest secrets when you first meet the person. I hope you don't, at least. That would be kind of weird. I've met some people who do that. But the point is, ideally, you meet the person and you have, what do? We have small talk, right? So you have small talk, and that's kind of what this is. This is just kind of broaching some topics. We're just saying, okay, so it's funny how sometimes in life we learn lessons when things go wrong. Sometimes those are the lessons that stay with us the most. And you have a little bit of small talk, and you work your way to maybe right here, and this is whenever you're really getting into, okay, I'm about to come out with my truth, or in this case, our thesis statement, and we're going to talk more about thesis statements in just a minute. Your thesis statement is the truth in this essay, essay 1, the truth that you're demonstrating, right? This is the lesson, and then this part, the body, that's where I'm going to tell you the story that proves the lesson is true, that demonstrates the truth of that lesson. So we've got an introduction, we've got a thesis statement, that's important, and you'll notice the thesis statement is at the end of the introduction because we need that introduction to really get us to the point where we can say, hey, you know what's true? This is true. Right? You wouldn't just walk up to somebody and say, hey, you know what's true? This is true. It'd be weird, again, and we just, of course people do that, but the point is you normally make the person feel kind of weird, and it's just kind of an awkward thing. And so we typically introduce, then we say the truth, and then we have the body. Now the body is broken down into multiple paragraphs. Traditionally, in high school, you've probably made it so that you probably learned it so that you have 3 body paragraphs. We're going to be growing out of that in college. So it might be 20 body paragraphs. It might be 7 body paragraphs. It might be 3 body paragraphs. The important thing to remember is a paragraph is always one section, one topic. And the next one talks about something else. The next one talks about something else. And we're going to talk a little bit about how this is going to work for your narration, because that's what this is going to be. It'll be a narrative, a story from your life. We're going to talk about how to section that off. But in every essay, we always have a body. Then we have a conclusion. Okay? And the conclusion is where we wrap up the essay, we review what we've said to the audience, and we remind the audience, like, remember that thesis statement I said before? See, it is true after all. That's where we do that. We never bring up any new ideas, and all we do is close the essay, okay? A lot of people feel like it has to end in some kind of poetic way or something like that. It doesn't. We're going to talk about this later in the semester. But the point of a conclusion is to finish and conclude, to wrap up, and to remind the audience of the thesis statement's truth, and even to kind of bring in some of the points just to remind the audience of what we were talking about in the essay. Okay, so that is kind of a short and a brief overview of what we're looking at creating every time we write an essay. So, how are we going to do an outline for this particular essay? Essay 1. Again, essay 1, it's a story from your life where you're demonstrating a truth. Hey, I learned this lesson, and this is the lesson, and this is the story that goes with it. Okay? So, this is how we're going to do that as far as outlining. We're going to have a thesis statement. Okay? Now, a thesis statement, and I want you to watch the video specifically on thesis statements, because the next video is specifically on thesis statements, because that can be a little tricky for some people. But in short, a thesis statement is, and it's not a question, it's a statement, right? You're coming out and you're saying, this is true, okay? It's like if we were in a classroom together with you, I would pick somebody, I would pick on some random person, and I would say, hey, what's your favorite band, or what's your favorite singer or rapper or whomever? And no matter what you said, right, maybe they said Metallica or whatever, I would say, Metallica sucks. And, we would have a moment of like, did he just badmouth my favorite band, right? But in reality, it's a demonstration of a thesis statement. Okay, it's not the most like intellectual way to do a thesis statement, but it says this thing. Okay, so Metallica sucks, right? It gives your straight up opinion about it. It's not saying I believe Metallica sucks. It's just saying Metallica sucks. It makes a statement. It makes a truth. Now after that, I would have to tell you why Metallica sucks. But let's just focus on what we're doing in this essay, and we're going to move along. So you're going to say, like, for instance, my thesis statement to my little story in my life was, okay, sometimes we should be content with what we have. Okay? Now you'll notice I'm not saying I believe or I think or anything like that. I'm coming out and just saying sometimes we should be content with what we have. Great. There is my thesis statement. So that, in the grand scheme of things, in my outline, I need to have a completely written out thesis statement. Okay? Done. Now, I need to plan the rest of my paragraphs. Now, for the sake of, in my little virtual studio here, I don't have a big chalkboard, so I'm just going to say, you guys remember what my thesis statement was. There's my thesis statement, okay? You need to make sure the first sentence that you write on your page is your thesis statement, okay? Awesome. That's one sentence done on your essay, and that's the most important sentence because that's the one we're going to prove. Next, we're going to have our topic sentences, okay? And basically, we're going to plan out all of the rest of the paragraphs. Remember, we've got this whole thing here, right? Okay? We're really just mostly concerned with the thesis statement and the body. That's really what we're concerned with whenever we're writing our outline. So, having said that, think about your story. When it comes to a narrative, we section these things off in time periods, okay? Or sections of, okay, I need to tell you this. Now, just to make this simple, I'm going to illustrate to you a very basic narrative arc, okay? So on a narrative, typically we have a narrative arc. So we're going to have our introduction, and this is where we're going to have, the thesis statement. And then we're going to have the setting. This is an important thing so that whenever I am hearing your story, I understand when it's happening approximately. You don't have to give me the date, but remember in my story, I told you it was when I was 4 or 5. And so you can say, okay, well, that was whenever he was a kid. And so in your mind, you can say, okay, well, these are the things, I was a kid once, right? And these are the things that were going on in my head. And these are the things that kids think about and do. And okay, it gives you a frame of reference, okay? So we give the setting. Maybe it's important that your audience understands that it's in a small town or in a larger city. Maybe it's important that your audience understands that it was nighttime or at a party or at your girlfriend's or boyfriend's house, or, remember to really think about what is important and what's not. If it's not important, like for instance, I didn't tell you what color shoes I had on that day, right? Because who cares? That has nothing to do with the story. So only think about what are some important things that this audience is going to need to know. Okay, great. That's going to be in my setting paragraph. And we're going to outline this here in just a second. So we've got our setting. And so then typically we're going to have the very first paragraph. And this paragraph is going to, it's going to be some kind of an action happens. Okay, there's some kind of an action that causes, generally it's going to cause conflict. Okay, so some kind of an action, some kind of a conflict arises. So for me, it was that I believed that my mother didn't give me enough soda. All right, so that was my conflict. I was jealous of my sister. Okay, then we're going to have some kind of what we call the climax, okay? So this is where generally there's some kind of an action that takes place. For me, it was whenever I filled the cup with water, okay? I took action, all right? So there's action that takes place here, and that is the climax. That's whenever maybe I stood up to the bully, or that's whenever maybe I did my best on the test, or I walked into that first day of basketball tryouts, and it's basically whatever it was that happened. It's the whole reason why this story really is worth telling. It's the action part, right? It's the part where you put it out on the line and there's going to be whatever happens next, whatever you learned, it's as a result of this action that took place. Maybe it's somebody else did something. So, maybe it's like, then my father came in and, rescued me from the dogs that were chasing me or whatever. But this is the paragraph where we talk about when you took action or when somebody else took action. Okay. Then on the next thing, we have basically this is where we see the effect of those actions. So sometimes we call this resolution. Okay, or we can just call it the effect. What resulted, we can maybe put that there, or results. result. There it is. What happened? What was the result? Well, in my story, I was very proud of myself until I took a drink of my soda and realized that I had ruined my soda, right? And I would talk about, that whatever happened, maybe I stood up to the bully, right? And then what happened was that the bullies stopped messing with me. Or maybe I got beat up and that's why I learned not to stand up to bullies or whatever, right? Whatever happened, whatever was the result of this action, of this climax action, that's what we talk about in that paragraph. And then we have our conclusion. Now, the conclusion is going to echo the thesis statement. So again, we're reminding people after they've read the story that illustrates the thesis statement's truth, we're saying, remember that thesis statement? Remember that thing I said earlier about sometimes we should be happy with what we have? Well, this is when I learned that. And from this day on, I always think about back in, whenever I was 4 years old, and every time I feel like I didn't quite get the right, treatment, or every time I feel like someone has slighted me, I think back to when I was a kid and I realize that sometimes it's actually better off to just be happy with what I have rather than to mess up what I have through silly actions. Something like that, right? That might be something I say in the conclusion. Okay? So this is the narrative arc. Now, let's think about how we're going to make this into a outline. And if you didn't get that, the nice thing about a video is you can just rewind and take a look at it as long as you want. But let me show you how you're going to work this into your outline. Well, we've got our thesis statement, right? Our thesis statement is going to be the first sentence. Okay? And we know that the introduction is, that's going to be, that thesis statement is the last sentence in that introduction. So, having said that, we know that we're going to need to have a paragraph for setting. Okay? We're going to have a paragraph, so I'll just do this whole teacher thing. All right? So we're going to have a paragraph for conflict. We're going to have a paragraph for climax. We'll have to have a paragraph for resolution. And we're going to have a conclusion. So what we have here is, and you may have more than one paragraph for these things, but you're going to have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs in this essay. Okay? An introduction, and then you're going to have 4 body paragraphs, and then you're going to have your conclusion paragraph. So that's what we're looking at. Now, in order for you to have an outline for this essay, all you need to do is have just a few words or have an idea of what happens. So the setting, I'm going to say I was 4 or 5. I don't remember. 4 or 5 years old. I was home with my sister and my mother. Okay? I need to let you know that my parents never bought expensive soda. They always bought the cheap stuff, and we rarely ever had even the cheap stuff. So this is where I'm going to give you background, and context. Okay, I need to do that in that paragraph. So I'm going to just kind of make a few notes. These are the things that I'm going to mention in that paragraph. The conflict, okay, so what happened? I thought my sister got more than I did. Now, I'm gonna have more than just one sentence in that paragraph. I'm gonna describe it. I'm gonna try to make it enjoyable for my audience to read. I'm gonna try to illustrate my emotional state so that my audience understands it better. But I just need to take a minute to make a note. What am I gonna talk about in that paragraph? Great. Climax. This is where I ruined my soda. Okay, I'm going to talk about that in that paragraph. I don't need to make a ton of notes. Okay, that's what I'm going to write about. And the resolution, this is where, I realized I ruined my soda. Okay, that's where I realized I ruined my soda. The conclusion, I know I'm going to be reviewing. I don't have to do a whole lot here for the conclusion. So now, guess what? For essay 1, I've got an outline. This is an outline for my essay. And you can do this on a Word document. You can do it by hand as long as you take a picture of it and send it to me with your homework. I'm okay with that. This is something that the whole point of it is for you to write down what you're going to say and where. So that way, whenever you go to actually write your paragraphs, you already know what you're going to say in those paragraphs, and it's boom, it's easy. Okay, this has been kind of a longer section, but I wanted to make sure it's very clear. Guys, thanks for watching. If you have questions, let me know. Time to get started.